A human crashed on a forgotten world, an alien girl marked by ancient code. When their hands touched, the planet remembered. Now hunted by her own kind, she runs. He follows, not by duty, but by something older than war, older than species, something waking beneath their skin. This is Sci-Fi Sky. The sky was burning. Kale Drayan rolled out of the ruptured escape pod just as the auxiliary fuel cell detonated behind him, sending a wave of white-blue fire arcing over his back. His boots hit the glass like sand hard, skidding. Wind screamed past, dry and metallic. The air on Aeyari tasted like rusted copper and burnt ozone. He didn't need his HUD to tell him. Hostile atmosphere confirmed. "Fuck me gently with a broken stabilizer," he muttered, slapping the emergency seal on his neck collar. A hiss of oxygen. The world steadied. Above, wreckage rained down like dying fireflies, shattered hull plating, fragments of the Scythe-1 spiraling against the magenta sky. Kale stood, joints screaming under his semi-bio suit, and turned to survey the damage. Nothing but a cratered ridge of pale crystal and a jungle of bioluminescent bone trees beyond it. The ship's beacon was dead. No comms, no signal, no team. Just him. And the hum. It started faint, like tinnitus in his molars, a low-pitched oscillation vibrating beneath his boots. He tapped his chest module. "Kale to Scythe base. Respond, priority red, I repeat." Then he heard it again. Not just heard, felt, a wave, like someone had knocked gently against the inside of his skull. Not pain. Something deeper. A call. Kale froze, turned toward the jungle. Something in there was pulsing, beating like a distant heart. His neural implant pinged once, confused. Signal, biological, pattern, human compatible. He laughed, out loud. Now that's just unfair. Weapon drawn, he headed into the glowing foliage. The jungle was watching. Leaves opened and closed as if breathing. Vines recoiled from his touch like nervous animals. The ground emitted heat in specific patches like it anticipated each footstep. Kale crouched low behind a fractured root. The pulse was louder here, rhythmic, close. He didn't expect to see her. She was running, no, gliding, barefoot across the clearing, arms streaked with what looked like molten silver. Her skin glowed faint blue under the canopy light. Her movements were sharp, too fluid to be human. Her breath was ragged, panicked. She clutched something tight to her chest, a shard of living crystal. Behind her, 3 soldiers in black exo armor, clearly Aeyari tech, moved like predators. Kale's training kicked in. He pivoted. 2 shots. The second took down the closest pursuer in a burst of ion smoke. The others scattered. The alien girl skidded, pivoted, eyes wide, uncertain, and then she saw him. Their eyes locked. 1,000 things unspoken passed between them in less than a second. Kale stepped forward. "Hey," he said, lowering his rifle just a fraction. "You look like you need a +1. She blinked, confused, voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here." "Yeah," he said. "My ship disagreed too." One of the soldiers reappeared, blade drawn. The girl spun instinctively toward Kale, reaching and their hands touched. The world collapsed inward, a sound like a bell made of memory. Heat surged through Kale's spine, vision fracturing into light, shadow, and something else. Not thoughts, not words. Emotions. Pain, fear, loneliness, hope, hers. She was inside his mind, and he was inside hers. Then it stopped. They both staggered back, gasping. "What the hell?" he managed. She stared, eyes glowing like twin eclipses. The bond, it wasn't supposed to activate. Kale stared down at his hand. His skin shimmered, faintly pulsing in sync with hers. He looked back at her, suddenly unsure whether to run or hold on. And then she whispered, almost in disbelief, "You're the signal." The vines were following them. Kale didn't notice at first, too focused on dodging roots the size of engine coils and ducking under glowing branches that shivered when touched. But after the 3rd time he looked back and saw the same bloom closing behind them, like a mouth sealing a secret. He knew. "This jungle's got attitude," he muttered, slapping aside a tendril that reached for his helmet. Iva glanced back at him. "It responds to fear." Kale scoffed, breath ragged. "Great, then it must love me right now." They darted through the bioluminescent underbrush, every step drawing pulses of color from the flora. Pink when Iva passed, electric blue when Kale followed. The trees whispered, literally whispered, in a language that sounded halfway between song and code. Behind them, the shriek of a drone broke the rhythm. "Tracking us?" Kale asked, already knowing. Iva nodded. "Biosignature keyed to my blood. And now, yours." "Fantastic," he said. "We're genetically bonded and being hunted." This is easily my weirdest first date." She didn't laugh. Her face was pale, her breathing sharp. "Why are they chasing you?" he demanded, vaulting over a root as thick as a transport rail. Iva hesitated. "That mark on your arm, what is it?" She slowed. Just for a second. Then, "It's not a mark, it's a birth code." "What does that mean?" "It means I was never meant to exist." They ducked into a narrow ravine, rocks pulsing faintly as they passed. Cale pressed his back against the stone, scanning the ridge above. Footsteps echoed. At least 2 pursuers, maybe 3. Then silence. He turned to her. "Talk to me. Who are you?" Iva looked away. "I was grown in the Dust Spire. An experiment. Hybrid. Meant to activate a lost link between species. Between yours and mine." Cale blinked. "You're saying we're compatible?" "I'm saying I was designed to reach across a war no one remembers." Cale stared at her. "I'm just a field engineer. I build things, fix things. I don't." "You were chosen," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "long before you crashed." He stepped back. "Chosen by who?" She met his eyes. "By the planet." A screech cut through the air. One of the Aeyari hunters dropped down onto the rocks, blade drawn, sleek, humming with dark energy. Cale raised his rifle, too slow. The blade slashed, caught his arm, and Cale dropped hard. Blood hissed as it hit the biostone, which turned red on impact. Before the hunter could finish, Iva stepped forward. She didn't move like a soldier. She moved like water, remembering how to flow. One motion, a twist, a gesture. The blade shattered in the hunter's hand as vines snapped upward from the ground, impaling him clean through the chest. Cale stared, wide-eyed. "Remind me never to piss you off." Iva knelt beside him, tore part of her sleeve, wrapped his arm. Their faces were close now, too close. "You felt it, didn't you?" she asked. "When we touched?" Cale nodded. "Yeah." Like falling without falling. She reached up, brushed aside his collar. There, just below his left ear, a faint shimmer. A shape, identical to the one on her arm. He looked at it, then at her. "That was always there?" "No," she said, voice hollow. "It grew." And somewhere deep in the trees, the jungle exhaled, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment. They didn't run anymore. The forest had gone silent, not dead, but reverent, as if holding its breath. Iva led the way now, slipping between vines that glowed pale violet. Her fingers brushed them like old memories. Cale followed, still cradling his wounded arm. The bleeding had stopped. The shaking hadn't. "You ever gonna tell me where we're going?" he asked, dodging a low-hanging neural bloom. Iva didn't stop. "Where the past remembers." "Well," he said, "that sounds both comforting and deeply culty." They reached a clearing. No birds, no sound, just a shallow pool fed by weeping roots, strands of gold dripping into the water like reversed rainfall. The branches above formed an arch, organic and cathedral-like. "The memory grove," Iva said, stepping in. Her feet glowed where they touched the surface. "It stores echoes." "Of what?" "Of who we used to be." Cale paused at the edge. The water pulsed. Not with light, but with something older, something watching. He stepped in. A wave of sensation hit him. Not wet, not cold, something else. A sensation he hadn't felt since he was a child, being held, without arms, without sound. His eyes unfocused, flashes. A child's hand pressed to glass. Blue skin, white hair, eyes filled with starlight. He gasped. "I know her." Iva knelt. "You dreamed of her, didn't you? Even before this." "I thought it was just trauma," Cale whispered. "Side effects from the neural tank. I saw her again and again, crying, smiling, reaching." "She wasn't a dream, she was a signal." "My mother," Iva continued, voice reverent. "An emotional architect. She believed minds could be tuned like frequencies, that memories could cross bloodlines. She worked on the Treaty of Breath." Cale turned to her. "That was real?" "She helped create it," Iva said. "A pact between 12 species. One breath, one bond. They believed emotion could be shared, not as weakness, but as a weapon against entropy." Cale knelt. The gold-lit water reflected both their faces, overlapping in the ripples. "And it failed," he said. Iva nodded. "Because trust decays, fear doesn't." Suddenly a voice, not a sound, but a shape inside Cale's ribs pulsed outward. "You are not alone." He staggered. "What the hell was that?" "My mother's imprint," Iva said. "She embedded it in the grove, waiting for the one who'd find me." Cale's hands trembled. "So all this time, I wasn't haunted. I was being prayed to." Iva stared at him. "No, you were being remembered." He looked into the pool. His reflection blurred, then sharpened, but it wasn't just him anymore. His face, overlaid with hers. her breath syncing with his. A single heartbeat under two skins. "Why me?" he asked. "Not bitter, not afraid," she answered softly. "Because the planet remembers who we were supposed to be." And deep beneath their feet, buried in the ancient roots, something blinked, and in that instant, a neuron along Kale's spine flared with golden light, as if the world had just whispered, "You're awake now." The cliff face opened like a wound. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't slide or hiss or part with a civilized welcome. It peeled, layers of mineral and biotissue folding back in shudders of sound, revealing a mouth of living stone. Kale stared. "Is it breathing?" Iva nodded once. "The temple's alive. It never fully died." They stepped through. Inside was not darkness, but pulsing memory. The walls glowed faintly with neural veins, strands of biolight that shimmered in slow pulses, like a slumbering heartbeat. There were no doors, no stairs, only directionless space and the faint scent of copper and ozone. Kale touched one of the glowing strands. It trembled beneath his fingers. "That's not wiring," he said. "No," Iva replied. "It's a thought." They walked deeper, barefoot now. The stone seemed to hum beneath their steps. Symbols etched into the walls lit up as they passed. Not alphabet, not glyphs, but emotions made visible. Kale slowed at one. "What's this one mean?" Eva leaned close. "Grief, but the kind you carry long enough that it becomes foundation." He stared at it. "I know that kind." At the center of the chamber, the ground fell away into a vast basin. In the center, a core. It floated, unsupported, a sphere of raw neural matter, surrounded by 12 cocooned forms, suspended like seeds in a womb. Each figure was bioluminescent, curled in slumber, their bodies patterned with lines that pulsed in a slow, alien rhythm. "The founding 12, Iva whispered, "the first to link their minds, to stop what came before." Kale stepped closer, entranced. "What came before?" She hesitated. "The Devourer, a species without memory, without emotion. They consumed light, but couldn't hold it. So they fed endlessly, until the 12 stopped them. And now," Eva turned to him, "now they sleep, waiting for resonance." Kale circled the core. His hand trembled as he reached out. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Iva said honestly, "but I've never been sure of anything that mattered." Together they pressed their hands against the core. It didn't react at first. Then, a sound, not external, internal, a chime in the mind, like neurons clinking like crystal. Light pulsed outward from the core, the cocoons shivered, and from the sphere came a projection, not hologram, not sound, but emotion in form. A field of synchronized pulses shaped like stars, forming a circle around Kale and Iva. A voice emerged. 12 began, to awaken, what is broken shall be remade. Kale staggered back. That's not possible. But as he spoke, the light traced his arm and the scar on his neck lit up. Not just lit, unlocked, unfurling like a memory unzipping inside him. He gasped, saw things, worlds, blood, breath, love, war. A child's voice screaming his name in a tongue he didn't know but understood. Iva clutched her chest. "I feel them, all of them." Kale fell to one knee. This wasn't just an invitation, it was a test. The projection spun faster, forming a sigil above their heads. 2 points of resonance flickering together. The other cocoons pulsed, then went still again. Kale looked up. "Why only us?" "Two harmonized. Others remain dormant. You are not the end. You are the ignition." And in the core of Kale's spine, something ancient locked into place. He didn't just feel Iva's breath now. He remembered breathing it before he was born. The shot rang out like the crack of a planet's bone. Kale hit the ground, pulled Iva down with him. Dust bloomed. The outer wall of the temple pulsed, like it felt the violence, and then went still. Red targeting lasers swept over the stones. A mechanical voice echoed. "Unauthorized neural contact confirmed. Extraction unit en route." Kale drew his sidearm. "We just lit up a beacon, didn't we?" Iva's eyes narrowed. No, this wasn't a response. She looked up, breath sharp. This was the plan. They ran, over jagged roots, through archways that twisted in on themselves like folded bone. The exit sealed behind them, alive, angry, closing like a muscle. Outside, the sky was thick with shadows. Dropships, drones, soldiers in polished exo-armor with the sigil of the High Conclave, and one figure not like the rest. A tall Aeyari male, silver tattoos gleaming along his face like fractures of moonlight. He didn't wear a helmet, he didn't need one. Iva froze. Velkarn. Kale raised his weapon. Velkarn smiled, like someone watching a candle melt exactly as expected. "Welcome back, daughter of a traitor." Iva stepped forward. This place is sacred. You have no right. Rights are for the living, Velkarn cut in, and for those who remember who they are. He turned to Kale, head tilted. Human, tell me, when you touched the core, did it speak to you? Kale didn't answer. Because it shouldn't have, Velkarn continued. It was meant for me. Kale scoffed. Jealousy? Seriously? You think this is about pride? Velkarn's voice twisted. We shaped the signal that brought you. We guided your crash. You weren't chosen, Kale Drayan. You were delivered. Kale's eyes widened. You sent the pulse? Iva's voice dropped to a whisper. You used me. I liberated you, Velkarn said. You're the key, girl, and every key needs a door. Soldiers surged forward. Kale fired once, stun round, then again. Too many. Iva tried to run, but the ground bloomed with tendrils, biotech restraint nets. They hissed and wrapped her legs like living rope. Kale reached for her. Don't, she screamed, if they get you too. But it was too late. He was hit, not with a bullet, but a pulse. Electric, silent. His body spasmed once. He dropped. When he woke, he was on cold metal. His wrists were bound in a strange gel, not solid, not liquid, but aware. A cell of shifting hex lattice. Iva was across the chamber, floating, literally suspended in a null field. Her eyes open, but unmoving. He called out, Iva! No response. A technician approached. Not Aeyari, something else. Biomech. Faceless. It pressed a node against Iva's forehead. Her body twitched. Then still, Kale pounded the wall. What the hell are you doing? Velkarn's voice came from the side, calm as a monologue. We are unlocking her, rewriting the encryption of a bloodline that never should have existed. He stepped into view, and once we've extracted the link, you're next. Iva's eyes flicked toward Kale, just for a second, and in that sliver of gaze, a single breath escaped her lips. Not in fear, but in rhythm. The signal was broken, but something deeper was still reaching. The walls weren't just walls, they watched. They pulsed like retinas. Every surface shimmered with phantom static, fractured light, breaking into shards of moments. His moments. Kale screamed, but the sound didn't return. There was no echo in the echo chamber, only reflection. Subject 87, human. No verified blood seal. Neural instability optimal for breach. The voice wasn't spoken, it slithered straight into his skull. Cold, clinical, mechanical. Begin resonance loop 43. The light shifted. The scream came next. Feminine, young, familiar. Lena. She ran across a maintenance bridge, the floor slick with coolant, reactor alarms, biofuses snapping. Kale reached for her. Too late. The explosion flashed blue, heatless, silent, his hands blistered in memory. Then it happened again. Then again, and again. Each iteration shorter, sharper, more precise. Not just memory, but edited guilt. He writhed in his restraints. Not metal, but neuroreactive filaments wrapped around his skin like thoughts congealed into matter. He wasn't being held. He was being rewritten. He stopped resisting. For just a second, the loop faltered. Emotional fatigue intensifying, preparing subject for imprint collapse. Kale collapsed forward, his breath shallow. I deserve this, he rasped. No, said a voice inside the loop, but it didn't belong. It didn't belong. It was hers, not spoken, not sound, but warmth, a shift in rhythm. Iva. Kale, if you can hear me, breathe. He blinked. The projection flickered, not just the image but the loop structure. You're not alone in there, not anymore. He drew in air, rough, wet with blood, but it was air. And then, everything changed. The walls pulsed with light, not red, not white, emerald. He heard his name not in her voice but in his own mind. A harmonic echo, vibrating at the exact frequency they had touched at the synapse temple. Iva was reaching him from outside the chamber, or maybe from inside him. A single breath, perfectly matched. Kale's fingers twitched. Unauthorized harmonic link detected. Initiate severance protocol. Blades of sound grew from the floor, shrieking like logic gone mad. But Kale stood. He didn't push off the floor. He rose. His restraints, coated in trauma, began to slough away, not cut, not broken, forgotten. His guilt no longer fed them. In the center of the room, the control node throbbed, a raw cluster of neural crystal behind glass. Kale walked toward it, one step, then another, each matching Iva's unseen breath. Why are you helping me? Because I remember you. I remembered you before I knew your name. You're in here, aren't you? I think we both are. He touched the glass. It hissed. Energy surged back, painless, just loud. A language of current. The chamber reacted, warping memory into light, into patterns. And for the first time since Lena's death, Kale didn't look away. He watched her die. Again, and he forgave himself, because Iva did. In the rippling surface of the node, his reflection wavered, but it wasn't alone. A second pulse shimmered behind his eyes. Green, soft, feminine. Iva wasn't just talking, she was within. The world cracked open with a breath, a single synchronized pulse, not felt, not heard, but known. It split the dark like a heartbeat cutting through death. Kale's eyes flared open. No pain, no gravity, just Iva's voice, still inside him. Now. The walls of his cell began to ripple, soft at first like liquid glass bending inwards. Then they shattered, dissolving into cascading filaments of neural light. Kale stood in the middle of the collapse. His body hummed, not from rage, from resonance. 1,000 layers of metal, biocode, and magnetic thought tried to resist him. They failed. Every lock that once held him remembered something ancient and yielded. He didn't punch, he didn't scream. He stepped forward. The guards outside barely had time to register the change before their visors flickered, systems crashing under a cascade of harmonic interference. A blink, a breath. They were unconscious. He followed the pull. Through the spiraling corridors of the pulse core, a cathedral of synaptic roots and luminous breath chambers. The air smelled of ozone and old memory. Every door opened for him, or more accurately, for them. Because Iva was in him now, not writing his thoughts but harmonizing them. Left. You're close. You sound different, he muttered, dodging a cascade of flickering anti-nerve traps. I've changed. Same. He reached the center chamber. There, beneath a dome of suspended bioglass, floated the resonance heart. Not a weapon, not a machine, but a living nexus of ancient consciousness. 12 strands of luminescent nerves fed into it like a chorus. Most were dark, but 2 pulsed. Green, gold. Them. Iva stood across the chamber, flesh and light. Her eyes met his, and they didn't smile, but they recognized. He stepped into the field. The chamber reacted. Sensors flared, warning tones echoed through the vault. Unauthorized presence. Cross-bond detected. Emotional harmonics unstable. Gee, Kale muttered. Thanks for the warm welcome. Iva walked to the heart. She placed one hand on its surface. This was made for 12, but 2 isn't enough to start a wave. A wave of what? Belonging. That's the most dangerous word I've heard all day. He joined her. Their hands met, not each other's, but opposite ends of the heart. The instant they touched it, everything screamed. And then everything sang. Their breath synced. Light poured from the heart, not outwards but into them. It wasn't power, it was presence. Kale felt every version of himself stretching across time. Soldier, brother, exile, failure, survivor, fuse into one living current. He didn't see Iva, he was Iva, and she was him. The dome above them cracked. Belkarn's silhouette stormed into view, blades drawn, flanked by enforcers. End the link, or I sever it with your blood. Kale turned, but he didn't raise a weapon. He just said, too late. The resonance heart ignited, but not in fire, in memory. Kale and Iva's harmonics surged into the core, releasing not heat but truth. A wave of consciousness burst from the chamber, soundless, radiant, ancient. It tore through Velkarn's guards, not killing, just undoing. Their minds reverted, shedding hatred like old skin. They fell, sobbing, whispering forgotten names. Velkarn screamed and fled. But the dome sealed behind him. Kale staggered. His hand glowed, so did his veins. Emerald lines pulsed beneath his skin, Iva's light, but not invading. Becoming. Kale, he whispered, still here, Imbling, but I don't think I'm just me anymore. Neither am I. They stood in the ruined chamber, 2 forms, 1 resonance. Their reflections shimmered in the heart's mirrored surface. Only one figure looked back, and it smiled. Light was no longer burning, it was becoming. The pulse core ruptured not with violence, but with memory, unraveling like an ancient breath held too long. The air shimmered, the earth swelled, a silence fell across Aeyari, but it was not empty, it was listening. Above the ruins, Kale and Iva stood where the core had once been. Their forms flickered at the edges, no longer bound by skin or weight. Their breath moved the dust, their presence bent the vines. They were still there, but not quite themselves anymore. Around them the vines bloomed, but not with flowers, with faces. Memories long lost, mothers, warriors, children, poets, now pulsed in strands of biolight, crawling from stone and ash. The ruins did not rebuild, they recalled. We're not leaving, are we? Kale asked, voice quiet and vast. Iva looked at him. Her eyes were no longer eyes, they were reflections. We're becoming. A spiral of light unfolded behind them. It pulsed gently, like a womb. From it stepped a child. Not born, not made, woven. Skin like translucent pearl, eyes like galaxies unborn. They looked at Kale, at Iva, and did not cry. The child bent down, placed its small hand upon the ash, and the ground breathed. A circle of biolight surged outward, turning ruin to seed, seed to root, root to whisper. It did not bring back the dead. It welcomed the yet-to-be. Velkarn, broken and staggering, emerged from the horizon, his armor cracked, his voice raw with hate. You were nothing but the echo of extinction. But the vines did not fight him. They remembered him, and in remembering, they let him go. He dissolved, not in pain, but in irrelevance. Kale and Iva turned slowly. Their hands never touched. They no longer needed to. They were synapse now. Pattern, pulse. The child looked upward, at the sky stitched by light. Then whispered, "Mother, I dreamed of light, and it called my name." Iva smiled, the last gesture her body would ever make. Kale whispered back, "Then go. Build us into something better." The wind rose, lifting ash into spiral halos. The child stepped into the light, carrying them both inside. Not souls, not memories, but the story of what love becomes when it refuses to end in war. And if peace begins with remembering, then what will we dare to forget to become more than who we were? They were never just fugitives. They were echoes of something ancient and seeds of something new. From a single touch, they awakened a world. Not with weapons, but with memory. Not with power, but with a bond no species could name. If you believe stories aren't just about survival, but about becoming more than what we were, then stay with Sci-Fi Sky. Because out here, in the quiet between stars, love still rewrites destiny. And this is only the beginning.